Welcome to the Language Alchemy Podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This is your host, Alejandra Siroka, a transformative communication teacher and coach who's devoted to helping multicultural individuals and couples engaged in personal growth transform their lives and relationships through conscious communication. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. I'm grateful you're here. And if you've been listening for a while, I am so grateful you are spending time with me, reflecting on your language, becoming more aware of some of your communication patterns, or learning transformative communication tools to have more fulfilling relationships. Thank you. In episode 145, when I guided you through a checklist to understand if your communication is relational or transactional, I shared with you that transactional communication, which is sometimes called effective communication, focuses on using language to get what you want. I also said that it's not bad to try to get what you want. In fact, part of communicating skillfully has to do with learning to set the conditions to reach your goals and objectives. However, when you use specific language as a means to an end only, especially if that particular end is to benefit you and only you, then we run the risk of disregarding the values and needs of others, which I know is not your intention. What if there was a way to ask for what you wanted that also considered others? What if you could make requests that others would say yes to out of joy and not out of obligation or manipulation? What if you could express how meaningful it would be for you to get a yes to a wonderful ask? Well, this is what today's episode is all about. Today, I am going to share with you the 6 components of communicating irresistible asks that I learned from one of my mentors, Marshall Rosenberg. Let's dive in. When I talk about communication, I like you to go back to its etymology, which is to find a common place, a point of union. For what? Collaboration. When you ask someone for something, I'd love for you to think about how every time you do that, what you are asking for is for an opportunity for you and the other person to collaborate, to join forces, to contribute to something that first and foremost is clear and specific. For example, when I work with couples and I coach them with their communication and we work on making requests from one another, they usually start by saying things like, "I'd like you to be less moody," or "I want more affection from you," or "Can you stop being so rude?" Well, when I hear this, if their partner says, "Oh, okay, I'll be less moody or more affectionate or not rude," I usually ask the partner who said yes, "What does this mean to you?" Many times what I hear is that they say something like, "Well, what this means to me is that my partner doesn't want me to be myself." And so then I ask the person who made the request, "Is that what you mean? That you don't want your partner to be themselves?" And the response I get is, "No, that's not what I mean at all." So then I say, "Okay, then let's be super clear and specific about your request. Because you asked for something that may have one particular meaning to you and a different meaning to your partner. What does less moody, more affectionate, or stop being rude specifically mean to you?" This is when one of them says, "Well, when my parents come to visit us and you know they're coming, I like to see you come up to the door and greet them. Then I ask the partner, does this seem clear and specific to you, what your partner is asking of you? If we get a yes, then I ask them if they would be willing to honor their request. And we usually get a yes. See, what happens here is that if the request isn't clear, or if it's too general, the person receiving the ask is either likely to resist and push back, or maybe they say yes out loud, but they have a lot of resistance in their internal dialogue. Because like in the example I just gave you, they're thinking, you are asking me not to be myself, which is not only a huge ask, but it's also triggering and hurtful. But if your ask is, could you come to the door and say hello when my parents come visit us? Something that's very clear and specific, you're more likely to get a, sure, I can do that. See, when the request is clear and specific, it's more irresistible. This brings me to the second aspect of a conscious and an irresistible ask, which is that it needs to be something doable. So when the ask is, can you be more of this or less of that? That request is neither clear or specific nor doable. Why? Because we human beings are alive and we're constantly in flux. For example, to the request of being affectionate, is this really doable? This request is vague, unclear, it's not specific, and therefore it's not a doable request. Because what if one of the partners comes from a culture where affection is expressed in a very different way than perhaps through touch, which is what this request for affection may allude to? Well, in this case, the partner receiving the request may either express or feel resistance to it because this ask may go against the social rule of their culture. So this ask could elicit a lot of discomfort and even lack of respect. I worked with several couples whose ancestors are from the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. And when they heard the request for more affection from their partners, they would say something like, more affectionate? And then they would offer a defensive response like, I call you by a loving name every time I address you, and this is the utmost expression of affection. What else do you want from me? Or, I make steady eye contact with you even in the presence of others, and that is the deepest expression of affection and intimacy. And you want more? Or, I make beautiful food for you that's nourishing. And can't you see that this is the ultimate act of affection? We get these responses because the request is not being seen as doable. Because again, it's not clear, not specific, and it doesn't take into account if the other person can imagine doing this. So this is when I teach people to paint a picture with their words of what this could look like for the other person, and then check if the other person could see themselves doing what they're asking them to do. This is how you make a request doable. I actually remember in a coaching session I had with a couple when one partner asked the other, would you be willing to put your arm around me when we are at home alone watching a movie together? And the partner responded, I could do that, but maybe not for the whole movie. And then they laughed about it and they agreed to do it for a few minutes. So when you make an ask, make sure you're asking for something that is doable by painting a picture with your words. Number 3, be value explicit. you need to mention the needs or values the other person would help you fulfill when they say yes, when you are making a conscious and irresistible request. And what do I mean by this? Let me give you an example. Let's say I ask you this. Please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or a 5-star rating on Spotify about the Language Alchemy podcast. Okay, we could say it's a clear, specific, and perhaps doable ask. And maybe you take a second to consider it, or maybe you discard the request right away. Now listen to this ask. The Language Alchemy podcast is my free contribution to the world. I share in the podcast what I have learned, integrated, and discovered over the years because I believe our lives and our communities will be able to enjoy peace, love, connection, and equity when we are able to transform our language. In fact, I know in my heart that bringing healing and meaningful connection through conscious communication is my dharma. It is the reason I came to this world. It's bigger than me. It is what I have devoted my whole life to. So please, as soon as you finish this episode, help me fulfill my dharma in bringing my message of peace, love, and equity to as many people as possible. When you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify, which are the platforms with the largest global audience, you are helping people who may be experiencing unnecessary pain in their lives and relationships have access to these free transformative communication tools. And you're also helping me realize my dharma. Can you hear the difference in this request? This time, I shared my needs and my values. And that invited you to give weight to my ask. You now heard about the importance of my request. You now know the why underneath it. So it's more likely that you will say yes to my ask because now you know how valuable your yes, your contribution is. Number 4, another aspect of an irresistible conscious ask is to make it time-bound. Say you want to ask your kid to help you bake cookies for their school event. So you say something like, I'd like you to help me bake the cookies for your school event. And your kid says something like, oh, no, I'm doing my homework now. Or I have band practice and then I'm going to help my friend fix their bike. Why are they saying no right away? Most likely because they're hearing your request as something that needs to happen right now. And that feels like a big ask. However, if you say something like, your school event is this Saturday, it would be so meaningful and fun to bake the cookies together and we'll name them after you. How about we bake them together on Friday before our family movie night? It would only take us about half an hour. Now, your kid has more clear and time-specific information. Even if they say no, they may say no to the specific time to bake cookies together, but they're more likely to say yes to the request of baking cookies together. For example, they may respond with, I have an extra soccer practice after school on Friday. Can we do it on Thursday evening after dinner? So see, they said yes. And what they say yes to was to baking cookies together, to having fun, to having a meaningful time together, and to having the cookies be named after them. Why? Because your ask was mostly irresistible. Number 5, the 5th element of a conscious request is to express consideration for the other with the language you use to make your ask. Say you need to make a request from a coworker, and you say something like, "Can you please email the sales team and tell them we need a meeting?" Okay, this is a very good start. This ask is clear and specific, and most likely it's doable, even though it is not value explicit. But what if your coworker is sick? Or what if they're on vacation? Well, then this clear, specific, and perhaps doable request may get some pushback, some resistance. When your coworker receives this from you, they may get upset. They may think, "Why couldn't you do it? Why can't you ask someone else to do it?" Or, "Don't you know I'm sick?" Or, "Don't you know I'm on vacation?" Your coworker may not even respond to your request because maybe they're hurt, triggered, or maybe they're concerned about you crossing a boundary. Or if they respond, they may do so in a defensive or a passive-aggressive way. So what can you do? Well, you can express obvious consideration for them. So for example, your request to your coworker could be like this. "Hi, I know you're not feeling well," or "I know you're on vacation, and I would love to give you visibility with the sales team. We need to email them about setting up a meeting with them for next Thursday. I think an email coming from you will help highlight your role in the meeting. Would you be willing to take 10 minutes to email them by the end of the day today?" Okay, now this request is more irresistible, and your coworker may not only be willing to send the email, but they may also know that you value consideration about their being sick or on vacation. And they will also know about your intention to give them more visibility. The sixth and final element of a conscious ask is that you give choice to the person receiving your request. Using the example of the coworker, you gave them choice when you use the words, "Would you be willing?" As in, would you be willing to take 10 minutes to email the sales team by the end of the day today? In the example about baking cookies together with your kid, you can add choice by asking, "Does it work for you to bake cookies with me on Friday before our family movie night?" And in the request about giving the Language Alchemy podcast a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcast, or subscribing to the Language Alchemy podcast on the YouTube channel, I could say, "Are you willing to help me help others have more peace, love, and equity in their lives by taking 2 minutes today right after you finish this episode?" The words "are you willing" are giving you choice. Any words that give the other person choice, such as "are you willing?" or "would you be willing?" or "does it work for you?" let the other person know that your request is not a demand, but that it's actually an ask that gives them choice, and it also communicates that you respect their needs, their values, their lives, their schedules, their autonomy. And now let's recap what you've heard in this episode. Today, I shared with you 6 elements of a conscious, irresistible ask. And those are: number 1, clear and specific. Number 2, doable. Number 3, value explicit. Number 4, time-bound. Number 5, obvious consideration for the other. And number 6, choice giving. Thank you so much for listening. Until the next episode, and as we say in Argentina, ciao ciao. Original music by Gary Lapoe. You can find all links in the show notes at languagealchemy.com.